Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And we definitely have not saved the A's thus far in 2035. As we sit here on July 23rd, we are 50-50. We are 16 games out in the American League West, and we are 3 games out of a wild card spot. In a season when ownership wants us to win a championship, and we are trying to pursue a 5th consecutive season in the playoffs after being projected to be a 100-win team in the regular season. So the season, particularly the last month and a half or so, is not going the way we anticipated, but we are still attempting to compete. We made, over the last less than 2 weeks, a trade for a pretty interesting young pitcher in Gabe Brewster. And even more materially than that, we also traded away Colt Keith, who has been the best player on the Oakland A's for most of the 11 and a half years that we've been running this team. In an entirely separate trade, we picked up Luis Lujan, who all he's done is lead the American League in homers 2 out of the last 3 years. So we are trying to be proactive, trying to keep this team competitive this year without completely sacrificing our future. Whether or not we'll be able to execute on that, who knows? And we're going to be making some more deals, most likely, before we finish this month of July and get to the trade deadline. Appreciate all of the comments and feedback on recent episodes, especially the discussion following our last episode. And it seems like most of the members of our worldwide scouting department are very comfortable if we were to move on from Byron Brain, 24-year-old prospect in our organization who was an international free agent signing in 2029. And most of you are pretty enthusiastic about us trading him for a guy who's going to miss the rest of this season. Fortunately, there are some other options which we'll be talking through soon. But even though, as we've talked about over these last 11 and a half seasons, the trade difficulty settings are supposed to make things difficult on us, and we've certainly seen that recently when we've shopped Jake Ortega, the top player in our organization, reigning American League MVP, a true 5-tool player, and arguably the best player in all of baseball. And if we try to pick up a 4th starter or a average second baseman for him in a trade, the response from the other GMs is generally, this is the worst offer that I've ever received. So it's a bit of a unique situation that Byron Brain, our young catcher slash first baseman, is a very in-demand player. Now, there's certainly some things to love about him. The 2 most notable are 70 power and a 65 eye to go with a pretty good personality. And I think when you put that incredible power and well above average eye in a package with a guy who, although not as good defensively as I typically like to have for my catchers, is a more than competent defensive catcher, I think there's a ton of value in that player, at least according to the AI general managers. Brain has been up with us for parts of the last 2 seasons, and even though he's been below average this year, he was so good in the 5 games he played last year that he has been an above average offensive player over his first 101 major league at-bats, 5 doubles, 7 homers, 15 ribbies, and 14 walks. But he's also struck out in over 50% of his at-bats, and that brings me to my concerns for Byron Brain. He's always going to strike out at an alarming rate, and his contact is only 40. He's 24 and a half years old. I don't know whether he gets to 45, and 40 contact with a massive number of strikeouts to me is a very scary batting profile, and one that, despite the obvious value in Brain from the home runs, the eye, and the ability to play a solid defensive catcher, makes me willing to entertain some offers for him. And when I think about the team, in a perfect world, I'd love to keep Brain and move on from Bobby Cabral, who has a very similar hitting profile, does not have as good an eye as Brain, is a better contact hitter. But Cabral is older, closing in on 29 years old, and he signed to a medium-term contract that, while not crippling, is not a bargain if he is basically a league average offensive player, and he hasn't even over the last season and a half been a league average offensive player, although he has bounced back this year with 22 homers and 41 ribbies through 287 at-bats. But I would love to move on from Cabral and keep the cheaper, younger, and more interesting defensively Brain, given that he can play catcher. But unfortunately, the AI is smart enough to know that Bobby Cabral's contract is not the same as Byron Brain's contract, because when we shop Burner Cabral, we can get a lot of interesting players in return, but it's not the same type of caliber of players that we can get for Byron Brain. And there are several interesting players out there where Brain is the only guy in our organization that they'll want in a trade. They value Brain even more than Jake Ortega, which doesn't make sense to me. So while I'd prefer to get rid of Cabral to bring on the type of guy that I would like to in this trade that we're contemplating, I think we probably have to trade Byron Brain. And when we go ahead and we shop Mr. Brain, we can see the guy right at the top of the list who many of you think we should trade for, and I do get it. Juan Ramos, although he's out with that ruptured MCL for the next 5 to 6 months and isn't going to help us this year, looks like he could be an absolutely awesome offensive player. His power could be as good as Brain's. His eye could be better than Brain's. And his contact is already better than Brain's and could be significantly better if he can get it to 55 and Brain remains at 40. Ramos, in his rookie year last season, hit .304 with 27 homers and 69 ribbies. But he's going to miss this entire year with that ruptured MCL that he suffered right towards the end of spring training. So while I think I would rather have Ramos bat than Brains, despite the fact that Brain is a more valuable defensive player, there are some other options out there that are just as interesting to me and possibly more interesting. So even though Ramos is the man of the people as far as the worldwide scouting department right now, I haven't talked through some of these other guys, and hopefully you'll come around to my way of thinking if I decide not to go with Ramos despite his very impressive ceiling. And the two guys that I was most interested in yesterday when we were trying to shop Byron Brain both actually ended up on the Miami Marlins. But unfortunately, and this is one of the vagaries of the game that infuriates me sometime, last night on July 23rd, last night in real life on July 23rd, 2035 in game time, when I shut down this game, there were two very interesting players that the Miami Marlins would offer to me. Today, one day later in real life, despite the fact that we are still on the same game day and haven't moved forward, the Marlins will now offer us neither of those players straight up for Brain. I think I can still make a deal for either of them, but it's going to cost me more. Kind of one of the hazards of wanting to do this live for all of you and walk you through my decision making. Clearly, it would have been better for the team if I had just done the deal yesterday and reported on it today. But those are the breaks. So turning to the Miami Marlins, and this fits with the theme that several viewers mentioned. If we do trade Brain, to look for either a big bat or a starting pitcher. And Kevin Patterson fits the starting pitcher part of the equation. You may remember he's a guy that we looked at on the 2031 draft. He was picked 12th overall out of Cal. We were hoping he might fall to us with our pick, but he did not. He has become a solid major league starter for the Marlins organization, 107 ERA plus and a 92 FIP minus over the course of his career. He is set to hit arbitration this upcoming offseason, so he's starting to get a little bit more expensive, but with potentially plus stuff, plus movement and average control, as well as 3 above average major league pitches, including an excellent change, mixed in with a curve and a sinker that are both okay. Really good stamina, really good at holding on runners. He's a guy that we were definitely very intrigued by when we saw that we could get him straight up for Byron Brain. Unfortunately, as I said, he's not showing up on that list anymore. Actually, even though he didn't show up on the list, they still will trade Brain straight up for Patterson. So that to me is an option that I'm definitely considering. Patterson is not an ace, but he's a good, solid major league starter with 3.5 years of team control. He's pretty much fully developed. If he develops a little bit more here at the age of 26, there's only upside. And he's proven to be a good major league starter. So I'm definitely intrigued by Patterson. He's not an ace, but I think he can pitch a lot better than some of the guys we've had in the back end of our rotation this year. So while Patterson is very intriguing, as I mentioned, there was another player on the Marlins that made it right near the top of my list with the likes of Patterson and Ramos if we are to move on from Byron Brain. And that's the first baseman, Andy Brailovsky. This is a guy who they offered us as well. Concern with Brailovsky is he's already in his first arbitration season, so only have control of him for 2.5 years. He's a pretty versatile player, although really primarily a first base DH. But a left-handed hitter with really good contact, good gap power, good home run power, and above average eye, decent speed, and he's pretty proficient on the base paths. And over the course of his first 4 major league seasons, he's put up a 115 WRC plus, averaging 34 doubles, 4 triples, 26 homers, and over 90 runs and ribbies in every 162 games that he plays. So he doesn't have quite the same power that we'd be giving up in Brain or potentially picking up in Ramos. But he's the best contact hitter of the bunch. He's got pretty good gap power, and he's got speed to take advantage of it. Some positive personality traits. And he's relatively young, even though he is in his 4th major league season at this point. The biggest positive is perhaps that he'll be able to help us if we decide to go in that direction, make the playoffs this year since he's healthy, as opposed to Ramos. Taking a look at the trade options for Mr. Brailovsky, though, says nobody makes this deal work. And this was the disappointing thing that I was noting, because yesterday Byron Brain did work for Brailovsky straight up. If we put Brain into the deal, it's very easy to get done. They'll basically take any asset that is not a piece of garbage in our organization, they will take in conjunction with Brain. So he's still a very realistic target for us, but it is a little annoying that they've changed their mind on being willing to go Brain for Brailovsky straight up, even though we haven't actually done anything in the game since the last time we checked in on them. So if we think we're going to look for a bat, we've got the comparison of Brailovsky versus Ramos. Brailovsky, definitely a better contact hitter who's going to strike out less. Brailovsky with more gap power, but Ramos with more home run power, and Ramos is going to draw more walks. They're both left-handed hitting first basemen in their mid-20s. Ramos, a lot more team control. Ramos, a little more popular nationally than Brailovsky is. And when we think about these two guys defensively, Brailovsky certainly has better defensive skills. And even though he's a couple inches shorter than Ramos, I think that the better skills that he has probably means he'll be a better defensive first baseman than Ramos, and Brailovsky can also play a number of other positions in a pinch if we needed him to, although that would not be optimal. And the interesting thing about Juan Ramos is that Seattle, I don't want to say is desperate to trade him, but they seem very willing to trade him, given that he's out for the rest of this year. Because it's not just Brain who makes a deal for Ramos work for us. We give up a big-time major league player, or we give up one of the better prospects in our organization. We can bring Ramos on board. So there's a part of me that wants to think a little greedily about this and say, could we get Ramos and Brailovsky, stash Ramos on the IL for the rest of this year, and have Brailovsky to help us now? If we do that, we are going to ultimately have to likely figure out a way to move on from Abraham Camacho. We did front load his contract, but making $5.7 million next year if we had both Ramos and Brailovsky on the team. Camacho, although we're playing him at third base now, is optimally a first baseman. So I don't know that we'd have room for all three of those guys in the organization, especially given that Bobby Cabral plays some DH for us in addition to the outfield at times. Lujan is a rental, so he will not be back. But there's a part of me that thinks we could get greedy and try to bring on both Ramos and Brailovsky. But as we are thinking about being greedy, there is also a part of me that since yesterday Miami was willing to offer either Brailovsky or the starting pitcher Patterson in a trade straight up for Brain. The greedy and aggressive part of my persona as general manager of the A's was trying to figure out Is it possible to get both of those guys from the Miami Marlins organization? And clearly we need to offer more than Brain to get that deal done. And the fact that Brailovsky's price has gone up since yesterday in real life is a little frustrating to me. But it is what it is. And when we closed down the game yesterday, we had a potential trade for both Brailovsky and Patterson fleshed out. The thing I need to figure out now is how much more expensive it is to do today, given that Miami seems a little more reticent to trade Brailovsky than they previously did. And unfortunately, the cost of picking up both Patterson and Brailovsky is slightly higher than it was yesterday, but it is still an executable deal. So we would be bringing on board Andy Brailovsky, a left-handed hitting first base / DH / corner outfielder if we were desperate type. He'd go right into our starting lineup for Brain and likely do a much better job making contact with the ball, although he's not going to hit as many homers or walk as much. He's also a guy who is going to be costing us more next season. But we did just make that big trade of Colt Keith to free up the money that gives us a little more flexibility next year. And then we'd be bringing on Kevin Patterson, who is a good, solid major league starting pitcher. Again, a guy who's headed into arbitration, only going to be ours for 3.5 years for sure if we want him to be. Just like Brailovsky is only ours for 2.5 years for sure, assuming we're willing to continue paying increasing arbitration numbers for both of them. But I like Brailovsky more than Brain to help us win this year. Patterson is an upgrade for our rotation. Losing Brain definitely hurts. That power and eye combination is special. The fact that he can do it while playing a competent defensive catcher makes it more special. But the strikeouts and the lack of contact scare the heck out of me. But I think others being AI general managers, value that more than I do. We have to give up some pretty interesting players to get the deal done. Least interesting is the fifth guy that we had to add in that we didn't need to yesterday. That's a 22-year-old starting pitching prospect, Hung Chol Kim, 9-2 for us in A-ball this year with a 2.37 ERA, but does not really have a profile that makes me view him as a real prospect. We also would be moving on from Sergio Estrada, who was a third place finisher in the Rookie of the Year voting for us less than 2 years ago. He's kind of become a utility infielder for us, and he's not hitting much. We like his glove, but keep in mind that we do have Steve Allison with a pretty good glove waiting in AAA. And then we also, as part of the Colt Keith trade, brought on another young third base / infielder into our organization. So Estrada, I think, has proven at the age of 31 since he's come over that he's a below average offensive player. And I feel like we've got, although we like his defense very much and his versatility, we've got some guys in the organization that can help us in the middle infield, so we're willing to include him. Rogelio Contreras, international free agent signing, a decent first base prospect. He's having a monster year in rookie ball. Probably will promote him to A-ball in the not too distant future. Certainly has dominant ratings at this point for the DSL. looks like he can borderline hold his own in A ball. But if he stays with us, we would be promoting him to A ball probably on August 1st. I tend to just generally do most of my promotions of players on the first of the month after we get the latest scouting reports and the latest progress reports, assuming that maybe there's some tiny benefit in the game to keeping people at a level for a full month rather than moving them to a new team. Don't know if that's a fact or not, but something that I do think about. And the biggest piece that we have to include outside of Brain, in my mind, is Rory Newman. You may remember him, a fourth-round draft pick of ours just last season. He hasn't been great in rookie ball, but he also just turned 19 years old. Still has a profile that, if he fully develops, could be a pretty good major league pitcher. But he's going to need that changeup to be a three-pitch guy, and even if that changeup develops, we don't think the fastball is all that special. Still got a fair amount of work to do with both his stuff, his ability to keep the ball in the park, and his control. If he reaches his full potential, he's basically as good, if not possibly better, than Kevin Patterson. I just think it's always difficult for high school pitchers in particular to truly reach their full potential. So although I hate to move on from a guy that we picked in the fourth round just a year ago and one of the better young pitching prospects in our organization, to bring over a good solid major league pitcher who can help us in the near term and the medium term, hopefully, as well as a big-time first baseman, I'm willing to include Newman in with Brain. Don't care as much about Contreras, Estrada, or Kim. So we are going to go ahead and make this blockbuster. We'll certainly track what Brain does over the course of his career, whether he gets that contact up a notch. I agree that the home run and the ability to draw walks are very special with him, particularly in the package as a catcher. But the strikeouts and the inability to consistently hit the ball are concerns to me. And they're not concerns with Brailovsky, and he still brings plus home run power to us, although he's not going to hit as many homers and not going to draw as many walks as Brain. He's going to ultimately get on base a lot more frequently, I think, with his really good contact. And is more kind of the player profile that I would like. And I think we've got Brain right now in our lineup hitting 8th. And we basically only got him in the lineup because we want to have a second left-handed bat against right-handed pitching. Brailovsky is going to be able to hit a lot earlier in the order, give us a lefty sometime in the early to middle part of the order, and let us push Cabral back in the lineup as well. So we are going to go ahead and complete this blockbuster. Some might say at 50-50, it's time to lick our wounds and accept that this is not going to be our year. That's not the way we play in Oakland. And we have put Mr. Patterson right into the rotation as our number 3 starter, just ahead of Gabe Brewster, who we picked up not that long ago. We've demoted Jamie DeVore out of the rotation into the bullpen. DeVore is a guy who has lost a lot of stamina since we picked him up, unfortunately. I think maybe that was part of his struggles in terms of the rotation. He just wasn't really set enough to go long enough for us. So hopefully he'll be a bit more effective working out of the bullpen for us. And then we demoted Mike Curtis. You may remember he was one of the pitchers we picked up in a trade this past offseason, an extremely popular player, but he's put up an ERA of around 6 for us this year, and he's already been in the minors once. Obviously, still has options since we sent him down earlier this season. So we'll get him a little more seasoning in AAA for the time being and probably see him September 1st, if not earlier. And we've obviously added Brailovsky into the lineup. He's going to be our cleanup hitter behind Jake Ortega against right-handed pitching, followed by Lujan, Harris, Cabral, and Camacho. Should be able to generate a lot of home runs at least. We brought up, rather than Steve Allison, Nelson Castellanos, third baseman, another decent infielder. He's not as good defensively, unfortunately, as Allison, but he's pretty much fully developed. Castellanos is a guy that we picked up when we traded away our old friend Bob Day at the end of spring training when Day wasn't going to make the team. Castellanos, a guy who had 2 option years left. He's done a really nice job for us in AAA this year, and at almost 25 years old, want to continue to play Allison down there every day, so we brought up Castellanos, who's the one who's almost 25 years old, to kind of be a utility infielder for us. We're definitely a little weaker than ideal in our infield defense right now with Toribio at short and Landin at second. The fact that we traded away Estrada and did not bring up Allison hurts us a bit, but Rodney Mesidor, the guy that we got back in the trade for Colt Keith, is capable of playing short for us in a pinch, and we will certainly train him to play second for us in spring training next year, or perhaps in the development lab this off season. Ultimately, probably we'll have Allison on the team if we do make to the playoffs as a defensive substitute and a little more defensive quality for us. But we're still experimenting with things. We're going with kind of a more offensive focused lineup against right-handed pitching, pivoting Camacho to third base. For those looking closely, I still need to figure out exactly who I'm going to take out of the lineup to get Brailovsky into the lineup against left-handed pitching. There's not an obvious guy that I want to get rid of there, but clearly he will likely be playing more often than not. One other point, and this is something that's been commented on for a few episodes now, with Jaden Boakai hitting better this year than Dave Ackley has for us, although not by a huge margin at this point, and the fact that Boakai is better defensively, we've gone into a pure timeshare with the two. Although Ackley is listed as the starter against both lefties and righties, Boakai is playing every second day, so we're going to go to a pure split for the time being between the two of them behind the plate. But don't think that I've forgotten about Mr. Juan Ramos. As we talked about, Seattle is willing to deal him. Maybe they have more knowledge of what he's really going to look like after that ruptured MCL. Clearly there is a risk that he's not going to be the player that we thought he was. He also isn't the best personality in the world, although financial ambition and loyalty just means that he's likely only with us while he's in his minimum in arbitration years, if he does end up with us. Not a lot of speed, horrible bunter, not good defensively, but the bat for the left-handed hitting Ramos, particularly against right-handed pitching, is pretty darn interesting. And because Seattle is maybe feeling about Ramos the way that we were feeling about Kevin Stubblefield, and they just want to move on from him, or maybe they know something we don't know, and there's going to be some pretty significant issues with him when he comes back. But given that the price for him is not crippling, I think we're going to try to make a deal and stash him on the IL for the rest of this year, and then potentially give us another really good hitting asset that we will have under our control much longer than Brady Harris and Luis Lujan and Andy Brailovsky, guys who we've traded for recently. Lujan, we've got for another 2.5 months. Harris, we've probably got for a couple of years. And Brailovsky, we probably got for 3 years. So bringing Ramos on board gives us a bat that hopefully will be with us for more than just a couple of seasons if we are able to pull a deal off. And we can make a deal for Ramos for 2 good, but certainly not great prospects, and I think it's worthwhile. It seems off to me that Seattle was so willing to give him up even for Brain, and the fact that there's lots of other guys they would take straight up for him makes me think maybe they know something, and this MCL injury is going to have a real big impact on Ramos' future. But for the guys we have to give up for him, I am willing to roll the dice. Center fielder Ken Hanna was a 5th-round pick a couple of years ago. Hasn't made it out of rookie ball, and honestly, we've been struggling over the last couple of years to get him consistent playing time because our as some of you who have followed us closely know, we've drafted a lot of outfielders in the early rounds of the last few drafts, but he's been a below 200 hitter every year in the playing time that he has gotten. Potentially really interesting home run power, but no guarantees that he makes it. And even the 65 home run power that he might have is just right what we think Ramos has today. Ramos has his limitations, and maybe he'll be fragile when he comes back from this injury. Maybe he's going to look different. But although Ken Hanna looks like he can hit a lot of home runs, he hasn't proven that to us in rookie ball over the parts of 3 seasons. Jimmy Thomas, also a 5th-round pick a little bit earlier. He's almost 25 years old now. Made it to Double-A this year, and he's doing really well there. 308 average, 11 doubles, 2 triples, and 8 homers in 198 at-bats. Put up a 145 WRC+. But he's not a great defensive player, and the bat, to me, looks like okay major league player. Maybe not even that. I mean, I like the contact with the speed and a decent eye. He can probably generate some offense when he gets on base, but it doesn't seem like he's going to hit for a ton of power, and he's already almost 25 years old. I think I'd have to be crazy not to do this deal. Even if Ramos comes back, he heals from that injury, and we find out in spring training next year he's a shell of what we thought he was, and his career is over. I don't think I'm going to miss Hanna or Thomas so much that I'm not willing to roll the dice that Ramos is going to be close to what we think he is. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade as well. Oh, the fans are happy we brought on Ramos, so that's positive. And we did get the 2 points back in fan interest that we've lost over the last several trades. So we're right back where we were at one point. So Ramos will go right on to the 60-day IL, and we'll see how this team can play over the rest of this month. Definitely the biggest trades that we've ever made. You figure we've added Ramos, we've added Patterson, we've added Brailovsky, we've added Lujan, we've added Brewster, and we've traded away Colt Keith, plus some other pretty useful major league players. Byron Brain, one of the top young players in baseball, at least according to his market, and several good to very good prospects to get all those deals done. It's been a crazy busy period here for the Oakland A's in July of 2035. Hopefully the moves that we just made will not only help us in the future, but will also help us for this really big road trip we've got coming up. 7 games on the road in Texas and Colorado. Texas, as we know, is 16 games ahead of us in the division, and Colorado is a wild card team in the National League right now. So this is going to be a very important stretch for us to try to hold things together and get this team back over 500 and a little more competitive into the wild card race. And we've won the first 2 games against Texas. Unfortunately, Luis Lujan suspended 4 games for his involvement in a bench-clearing brawl. Lujan, another home run in those last 2 games that we played against Texas. So 4 homers and 9 ribbies in his first 40 at-bats for us, as he is doing exactly what we needed offensively. It stinks that we're not going to have him back till the final game of this road trip, though. And we lost the final 2 games to split the 4-game series in Texas. Lost the first one against Colorado before bouncing back with big outbursts, winning 8-1 and 16-3 in the final 2 games of the road trip. So a 4-3 road trip against the best team in baseball and one of the best teams in the National League is certainly solid. But at 54-53 here on July 30th, we probably need a little more than solid to get us where we want to go. Still 16 behind the Rangers in the division, and we've actually dropped to 3.5 out of the final wild card spot. But you can see we've got 6 teams separated by just 4 games for the 3 wild card spots in the American League. So it's definitely going to be an interesting race. Lujan still second in the AL in homers. Ortega is third in the league in steals, OPS, and batter WAR at this point. Still nobody on the pitcher leaderboard for us, but hopefully things will start to change a bit with these big moves that we've made over the last 2.5 weeks or so at this point. I'm going to continue looking to see if there's something to possibly do in the trade market, but I think we've been pretty aggressive. I think we've got the horses that can hopefully help us win, particularly once center fielder Luis Lara is back from his injury. But we'll see. As the 80s, I don't know how I would characterize them. The 80s punk/pop band Romeo Void said, "Never say never." And although we're back home for the final 2 games of the month, the task really doesn't get much easier for us because the Toronto Blue Jays are first place in the American League East at 63-41. So I guess Colorado's actually slipped back a bit. They're tied for that final 2. They're tied with the Padres for the final 2 wild card spots after losing the last 2 games to us. But Toronto, with the 3rd best record in the American League, is a division winner and a team that we could conceivably be facing in the first round of the playoffs if we're able to sneak into that final wild card spot in the American League. And we got a big win, 4-0 in the first game against Toronto as we head to trade deadline day. A excellent performance from our ace, Jackson Ferris. Gave up just 1 hit and 3 walks while striking out 12 over 8 innings pitched. And we've won the second game at home against Toronto right before the trade deadline. I don't think we're going to do anything here, but I did mean to mention yesterday noted that the young shortstop Andy Toribio, last year's AL Rookie of the Year, just won American League Player of the Week, .457 average with 2 homers and 6 ribbies. Helped fuel that 4-3 road trip against a couple of good teams, and guessing he's probably continued hitting a bit over the last couple of days as we've won the first 2 of the homestand against Toronto to finish off this month of July. And I mentioned earlier in the episode that I usually like to promote guys in the minors on the first day of the month after we receive the player development update. I didn't articulate what it was quite as well when I was talking about it. Disappointing, of course, to see that Andy Brailovsky's power potential, current power rating, and his current and potential gap power ratings both decline within just days of us bringing him on board. Still think that profile is a pretty good major league hitter. He's certainly been that way over the course of his career. Not off to a great start in his first 39 at-bats in Oakland, but obviously a very small sample size, and he has driven in 7 runs in 9 games despite hitting just 231. So it's not like he's been entirely unproductive for us. And as we sit here on August 1st, no more opportunity for us to make any trades. 56 and 53 records, so we're 6 and 3 since we started this episode. Still 16 games behind the Rangers in the AL West. We've closed the gap on the final wild card spot to just 2 games. Hopefully we can make that up over the last couple months of the season. Before we finish things off, we'll check in on our team statistics, and then we'll also do a quick check of the new additions to the team. We've already checked in on Brailovsky, obviously. Ended up 11 and 14 in July, and we had to play pretty well over the last week and a half or so to get there. Our 56 and 53 record is actually one worse than expectations at this point. We are now tied for 5th in the American League in runs scored and 2nd in home runs. We're going to need the lineup to drill a lot of balls over the fence for us, I think, to get this team to where we want it to be. Still a middling pitching staff, which is rare for us, 7th in the league in runs allowed. The bullpen has been fine, 3rd in the league in ERA. The starting ERA of 4.52 is 10th in the league. I think if we can get that even just to 8th, right in the middle of the American League over the final couple months of the season, we can probably guide this team into the playoffs. Still one of the better defensive teams in the American League by the metrics, at least. And I mentioned we've already checked in on Brailovsky. We'll check in on a couple of the other new additions as well. Kevin Patterson, you can see, has done a really nice job for us in his first 2 starts. 1-0 record with a 2.08 ERA over 13 innings. So that is certainly helping our performance in the rotation. Gabe Brewster, unfortunately, 0-2 in his 2 starts with a 6.75 ERA. So that has not gone as well so far, but there's still time for him to hopefully earn his keep with us. Lineup-wise, we talked about Brailovsky, Luis Lujan, 275 average, 5 homers, and 15 ribbies in just 51 at-bats, so he's certainly delivering everything we would have hoped from with a 166 WRC plus over his first 13 games in an Oakland A's uniform. Rodney Mesidor, still playing only, or starting only against lefties for us. He's 3 for 6, hitting 500. Might look to get him into the lineup against right-handed pitching to improve our defense there. Abraham Camacho, who's been playing 3rd for us, really struggling offensively this year. I think we are going to make that swap to get Mesidor into the lineup, tighten up our defense, and Camacho, with the recent additions of Brailovsky and Ramos, may not be long for our team anyways, even though just a few months ago we were thinking he could eventually be our Colt Keith replacement at 3rd base, but the world moves quickly. Last but not least, Nelson Castellanos, 2 for 6 with 4 ribbies in the very small sample size he's had for us. So kind of weird. I guess I understand it. Yeah, I mean, 2 for 6 with 4 ribbies to me sounds pretty good, but Somehow that's a 55 WRC plus and a not great OPS plus either for him. But I think that's largely the quirks of a small sample size. But we've got a lot of work to do with this team. But I think we've made some interesting trades for not just this season, but for the future. And hopefully, when we think about this season, the trades we've done and the team that we started the season with will be good enough for us to overcome that 2-game deficit in the wild card race over the final 2 months of this season. And we'll find out how we do in trying to guide this team to a 5th consecutive playoff berth in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.